going back to the school, the home where we were, about a year had passed, and then Edith, my friend Edith, had changed a lot. She became very skinny. She had cut her hair. I mean, she had changed a lot, and we became very close friends, and we shared a lot of intimate talks. I still couldn't bring up my stepfather, but we just became very, very close. And we became close with the other two, with two others in our room, the two from France. And she and I found that we had a lot of things in common, as far as I found out after becoming friendly with her that she also was not a Zionist, that the reason she went to Israel was not because of Zionists. She also had problems at home of a different kind than mine. Her mother was a widow, and her two sisters, the three of them were going to school, and her problem was her older sister, the jealousy. I said before they were 2 years apart. It was only a year and a half. And Edith could never compete in a million years with her older sister. So the poor kid had a lot of problems. Boys never looked at Edith. They ignored her. She was fat and ugly. And her sister happened to be a stunning young girl. And Edith just couldn't cope with the competition. So her excuse, and of course she also listened to all the propaganda, so her excuse was, oh, she became a Zionist, she has to go to Israel. So we found out after becoming good friends that she also left for personal reasons, not being happy at home. Anyway, after living a year in that home, we both decided that maybe we could take off on our own and maybe go to Tel Aviv and find a job and just be independent. I mean, we felt that we did not owe the state anything, the state of Israel, that we could contribute in other ways. We really didn't know what the hell we were doing in that place, in that home. And so one day it was 1950 by then, and we approached the principal and we expressed a desire. At that time we were 17 years old already, and we expressed a desire of going to Tel Aviv and work there, and if that would be all right. So again, being under 18, we needed a signature. It was always with signatures. We always had to have one of the two parents' signature. So she wrote to her mother, I wrote to mine, and I explained that, our Hebrew was very good already, and we could function in Tel Aviv. We had heard that Tel Aviv was a real big city and full of life and all that. Anyway, we lied a little to our mothers, and we explained how Tel Aviv would be the right place to live, and we need the signature. Anyway, that was all settled very easily. My mother signed, her mother signed, they mailed it back to us, and the two of us on our own went to Tel Aviv. There we shared a little room. Oh my God. Whenever I think of that room, you could die, but anyway, it was better than nothing. Oh, also, of course, we needed some money to start us off till we found a job. So in that case, my mother helped me, and her mother helped her also. They each sent us some money to start us off. Now, Edith was lucky. She knew how to sew very well. Her mother is a seamstress. And so Edith learned how to sew, and she was very good at that. So she found a job very easily at the sewing. It wasn't a factory. It was much smaller. It was a private outfit where they had 3 women sewing there. With me it was a little harder to find a job, but since I wasn't equipped, I wasn't qualified for anything special. So I found a job in what they call a confiteria, which is a place where they sell cookies and cake and bread, and in the same room, and they had small tables where they served coffee and cake. In other words, it was like a coffee shop, but no food, just cakes and cookies and coffee to serve. And then, of course, there was the other section where people just came in to buy cake. Israel was full of those types of places. It was actually a coffee house. It was really exactly called a coffee house. And I worked there for about a year, until I was 18. Now, during that year, we shared that tiny room, Edith and I, and then we each had our own private lives. Now, we worked not too far from one another, and it was one of the main streets in Tel Aviv, the heart of Tel Aviv. I worked right near Dizengoff, which is near the beach, it was beautiful. We were both very happy at that period with our lives. I enjoyed my job. I met a lot of people. And the two bosses I worked for were very kind and very nice. In fact, I remember that one of them had very small children, and once in a while I'd babysit when him and his wife would go out, so I'd make even extra money. And so Edith and I lived together, but our private lives were very separate. She met a lot of young men, and I did too, and mostly through that coffee house where I worked. And one of my very first boyfriends, I remember, was an Englishman. Well, Israel at that time anyway, that was 1950. Oh, there were so many. It was so interesting. You'd walk in the street, or you'd be or you'd be in a bus, or wherever you would be. Mostly, of course, you would hear Hebrew. But then you'd hear so many languages, like La Tour de Babel, which I had mentioned before. It was fascinating, all the languages. French, Polish, Hungarian, Russian. It was one of the very best years of my life. I didn't feel too lonely. The city life was fantastic. I always loved city life anyway. Anyway, my very first boyfriend that I had met in that coffee house where I worked was an English guy. And he had asked me to go out. In fact, most of the men I met was through that place. They would come in one or two and sit down and order coffee and cake, and I'd serve. And I was already very popular at that time with young men. Anyway, he was the very first one after Maurice that I'd gone out with that was my age and my contemporary. And I remember that I went out with him at night for a drink. He had asked me, and I said okay, and we went out together. And I remember this was the first symptom of my sickness, of my ghost, my Maurice, the ghost. I remember as we were talking. Now, we conversed in Hebrew, of course, and my Hebrew was pretty good at that time. Since I didn't know English, I just knew he was from London originally. And I remember this so clearly, and this continued throughout my lifetime. As we're talking, I'm asking questions regarding personal questions, like what kind of music does he like? Does he play an instrument? And of course, I was hoping he'd say, yes, I play the violin. Or I would ask, do you paint? Or I was always searching for something that, at least one little thing in common with Maurice. Well, the only thing I remember about this guy that reminded me of Maurice were his hands. They were so soft on the outside. He had strong hands. And I was hypnotized by his hands, and I said, oh well, that's something already. So I remember we went to a movie together, and after the movie he took me home. I wouldn't let him in that little room, not so much because I didn't want him in it's just that it was so ugly. We lived about 15 minutes from where we worked, and we had to take a bus, but the room was owned by Arabs. And it was so disgusting. We were so ashamed to invite anybody there. So all we did was kiss at the door and hugging and kissing and hugging and kissing. And anyway, I met him again a few times after that, and we went to his apartment, and of course we made love. I've had many, many boyfriends during my 5 years in Israel. And before I go into each affair that meant anything at all, I have to say that if I kissed a man, a boyfriend, I knew invariably that after that we will end up in bed. I never had any qualms about that. If I didn't even let the man hug me or kiss me, that meant that there was no way. In other words, I never believed in petting, the way the Americans describe it, or in touching, or any of that. If I was willing to kiss someone, I knew it was going to be all the way. That was my pattern. Either I was attracted to someone, or I wasn't. It was never a kiss goodnight, and that would be the end of it. It was either no kiss at all and nothing would come of it, or once I did kiss someone, it was going to be in bed. I'm not at all a hypocrite. I never liked playing games, and my relationships with all men was like that. No games, no tempting and then cutting off, no flirting or exciting them and then stopping. It was all the way or nothing at all. Now, I had many boyfriends. It was completely platonic. I absolutely felt not attractive. So I remember one in particular who said, okay, you don't want to have an affair with me, you don't want to go to bed with me, at least let me give you a kiss. And I said, no, a kiss means going to bed. I mean, I just could not disassociate the two. To me, kissing a man and sleeping with him was you either kissed and went all the way, quote, as they say in this country, or you just didn't kiss. It just wasn't fair. One should not play games like that. So I'm just saying this, it's almost like free association, because that has always been my pattern, my way of looking at things. So that was that whole year how I lived in Tel Aviv. Edith and I shared that little ugly room owned by Arabs. I worked during the day. At night I went out a lot with boyfriends. After the Englishmen came many others. And with each one I would, of course, invariably look for something that he would have in common with Maurice. And by then my Hebrew was quite fluent, so I went out with a lot of Sabres, Israelis, young men who are born in that country. And there were so many, I never kept track. Edith and I had become more intimate as far as talking, but she still at that point did not know about Maurice. But she did know that I was not a virgin anymore. As far as she knew at that period, it was the Englishman who was my first boyfriend. And she went out also a lot with boys at that period, but she did not, she did not believe in giving herself completely. So that was the whole life for a year. It was pretty good. And of course Maurice and I continued to correspond, and his love letters were as great as ever, and that was about it. This was that whole year in Tel Aviv until about June, the end of May 1951. We lived in Tel Aviv about a year. There is one other thing I must say, that regarding my uncle, aunt, and my two cousins, David and Svi, they had immigrated to, I left Belgium in March 49. They left for Israel, all four of them. They all immigrated together at the end of 49. And they end up living in Netanya, which is about 40 minutes by car or by bus from Tel Aviv. And till today, they all still live there, except my poor uncle who died last October. But so I would very often visit them, and it was like a home to me. My uncle and aunt were really like parents. They were so wonderful. They did not, of course, know about my relationship with Maurice. I mean, nobody knew. Nobody knew. Of my two cousins, my older one, David, who was 3 years older than I, him and I had a wonderful relationship all our lives. We were like brothers and sisters. I felt the same way with my younger cousin, but he was like a baby. We were 6 months apart, but I always felt so much more mature than him that I treated him like a baby. But David and I, our relationship was extremely close and very fraternal in the sense of confiding. We respected each other. I thought of him as highly intelligent and intellectual. And he respected me also in the same fashion. And anyway, they all lived in Netanya at that time. And it was nice to have somewhere to go on special holidays, like Jewish holidays. I would always spend that time with them. So things went quite well around that period.